holding in my hand one of the rarest plants in the world, the Cylindrocline from the island of Mauritius. There's only 40 of these left in the world. This week I'm at the Brest Botanic Gardens in the west of France, a haven for endangered species. It's here that botanists are resuscitating some of the world's lost gardens. Welcome to this week's show. Coming up, when plants are their own worst enemy, we head to New Caledonia, where a notorious invader is threatening the biodiversity of the island. How are authorities fighting back this green cancer? Next, imagine there's only one plant specimen left and it can't be germinated. That's when specialists here in Brest turn to biotechnology to bring life back to a dying species. And finally, Africa's version of the Great Wall. We stop by Senegal, where efforts are underway to build a mammoth wall of trees across 11 nations in a bid to keep back the sands of the Sahara. So you're telling me that over here we can see what's the most endangered species in France?
This is a very rare plant, not only in France but in Europe. It comes from this region, from Brittany. Here we're preserving it in its natural habitat.
It's not overly impressive to look at. Why is it so important that we preserve it?
Admittedly, it's not the most beautiful plant, but it is a living species. We can liken it to a Picasso. People would be shocked if anyone destroyed one of his paintings. If we let this species disappear, we lose millions of years of evolution that we cannot replicate.
Of course, it's man that's often the greatest threat for these plants. In New Caledonia, authorities are fighting back a green cancer. It's an invasive alien plant which was, of course, introduced by humans, but it's now having a devastating effect on the biodiversity.
It's not just a random walk through the forest. These two men have a mission: to look for a plant that's posing serious dangers to the local ecosystem.
Look, there's some over there.
They find what they're looking for: Myconia, a fast-growing plant from Central America, often called the green cancer.
It has very large leaves. There's a purple on the underside. They block sunlight from reaching the bottom of surrounding trees. And other plants on the ground can't grow because of a lack of light.
A threat to local flora. Now humans are fighting to weed out this invasive plant and protect other precious species. More than 70% of New Caledonia's plants are endemic, ones that are only found here. To battle against this fast-growing shrub, they target its flowers and seeds inside them.
A single plant produces some 1 million seeds in a year. The seeds can stay up to 20 years on the ground before growing into a new plant.
So it's really like a time bomb.
Exactly.
Eradicating Myconia is almost impossible, but they hope to at least limit its propagation. However, Myconia is not the only invasive plant threatening the local environment. Some 200 introduced species can be found on the archipelago. This grass is also harmful to other plants, as is this cactus, often seen on the roadside. Local authorities have been trying to prevent foreign species from coming in, putting in place tight border control. Passengers arriving in New Caledonia regularly face quarantine.
Trekking shoes like this one often have dirt stuck on the soles, and they can contain seeds of invasive plants and things like that. You didn't collect any plants, seeds, leaves or earth, did you?
More than 30,000 people each year are stopped at the customs and questioned by plant control officers.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a twig. Isn't this part of a potato? It's banned too, you know.
All these are confiscated.
We catch about 1,100 to 1,200 offenders a year. That's about 3% of travellers. And about the same as in New Zealand and Australia.
Introduced plants are the single biggest factor jeopardizing this tropical environment. 49 of the 100 most invasive plants are found in France's overseas territories, including New Caledonia.
Now going to take you to perhaps the most unique part of this conservatory. It's inside these freezers here. Thousands of seeds from all corners of the globe, all of them critically endangered. And that's where the botanists here in Brest step in. They've been carefully cultivating these seeds and once flourishing, return them back to their homeland. Somewhat ordinary looking, it's impossible to estimate the value of these seeds. They belong to the plant Cylindrocline from the island of Mauritius, a species that not too long ago was considered extinct. Not only had it disappeared from the wild, but the only available seed could not be germinated.
We cut the seed in two to see whether it's alive or not. And by doing this, we found that there was in fact a living part and a non-living part. So that's why the seed couldn't germinate on its own.
By separating the good from the bad, the botanists in Brest have revived this plant from its deathbed. They received help from a biotech laboratory. Here, Manuel plays the role of surgeon by cultivating the plant in vitro. Inside these test tubes, water, minerals and sugar, plenty of it, to allow the plant to grow without using its own energy.
We have to work in laboratory conditions, in an environment where we can control all the elements. That's what really determines whether we succeed or not. It's almost like a hospital when you think about it.
The plants are then left to propagate in this culture room, alongside thousands of other specimens equally monitored.
The room receives light 16 hours each day, 7 days a week. The temperature is set at around 20 degrees, so they are in an ideal condition.
In vitro culture helps the plants to thrive and reproduce on a large scale, but it's inevitable that eventually they'll have to return to their natural environment. Here they've arrived back in Brest for acclimatisation, the end of their sterile universe.
During the acclimatisation step, we completely changed the living conditions of the plant compared to when it was in vitro. When we first tried, we acclimatised between 50 and 100 plants, and we lost all of them in 1 week.
But practice makes perfect, and now there's several dozen of the leafy plants guarded closely in this greenhouse. No one knows for sure why Cylindrocline disappeared from Mauritius in the first place, but it's most likely due to human interference. And in a turn of events, it's now man who's behind its repatriation. In several days, these plants will make one rather long journey back to their homeland.
Here we're removing all the soil from the roots to avoid introducing any parasites, any insects, anything that lives in the ground into Mauritius. There's a plant protection service that will verify that they are in good health, and only then can the plants be received by the authorities over there.
There's a few final preparations before the plane trip, but in as little as 6 months, these plants could be reintroduced into their natural habitat. The precise location, however, will remain a secret. Despite what one might think, plants can exist in the driest of conditions, such as those recreated in this greenhouse. A project in the Sahara is using exactly these types of plants to build an enormous 7,000-kilometre wall of trees to fight back the encroaching sands. Some have described the idea as a touch of madness, but daunting problems often require radical solutions.
Inch by inch, the desert is slowly taking over. With less than 300 millimetres of rain every year, the dryland ecosystem is extremely fragile. Grazing animals are only making matters worse, so herders have now been barred from several stretches of land, keeping them away from Africa's newest forest.
Here we're in the Great Green Wall, one of several plots that make up the wall.
The Great Green Wall is an audacious and ambitious project. To halt the advancing desert, the scheme aims to plant a 15-kilometre swathe of trees, stretching 7,500 kilometres across the continent, from coast to coast.
A real wall in maybe 20 years.
7 different tree species were chosen for their ability to adapt to these harsh conditions, and it's hoped that over time, the conditions will improve.
It's going to change the local climate. It'll create a microclimate.
Historically, the Fula people of this region are herders, but with funding from the scheme, they're discovering arable farming.
We've planted 5.5 hectares.
That's 5.5 hectares of green, but also a source of food and income for the Fulani women.
It aims to bring stability and a better life to these people and help them diversify out of herding.
15,000 trees have already been planted, but at this rate, it'll take over a century for the wall to be finished.
And finally, Finally, we leave you with details of yet another colossal project underway. The world's leading botanists have just begun a catalogue of every plant in the world. They're hoping to have at least 400,000 available online for free by the year 2020. That brings us to the end of yet another week of Environment. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. We look forward to seeing you, as always, next week.